less community members than I was hoping for, but you know what? I appreciate you all being here all the same. We're gonna have to wait on this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to wait on reviewing our minutes from the last meeting until Kim gets here. But I would like to just kind of talk about why we're all here tonight. It hasn't gone before the board yet, but as the budget committee, we did make a decide what to do as far as recommendations go. And we're going to talk about the budget for the upcoming year, where we're at, what we're looking at, what's projected going forward with A and B, and kind of what that means for the district, what that means for us, and then what that means as a community. So I think I just saw Kim walk in, so I will give her a minute. But does anyone have any? Oh, there's Kim. All right, perfect.
So we'll go ahead and move into our agenda. I just want to do a real quick thank you. First of all, to Chair Henning. Kind of fun to be able to welcome her in her new capacity. It's nice to have our board here. Trustee Bronson and Trustee Skornagoski for all of the work that you have put in this year. Very specifically to our Director of Business Operations, Mr. Luke Decons. He has done a wonderful job pulling all of this together, providing information to cabinet, who has been part of the conversation. And as we go out and we talk to people and discuss where we're at as far as our budget goes. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our Director of Business Operations, Mr. Luke Decons, to run the remainder of the meeting as far as the presentations go.
Thank you, Superintendent Hoyer. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Trustee Henning to do the quick note review, and then we'll move into the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you. Have you had a chance to look over the minutes from the previous meeting?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the minutes of the February 17th, 2026 Budget Committee meeting as presented.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the Budget Committee meeting minutes as presented from our February 17th, 2026 meeting. And if there are no comments or questions from my fellow trustees or community, okay, then I will look for all in favor of approving. Please say aye.
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 Aye. And all opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Thank you. Mr. Decons, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Thank you, Trustee Henning. If you happen to notice, it looks eerily similar, I would say, to how our board meetings usually end, with about the same number of people here with the same faces. So welcome to tonight's town hall meeting about our budget for the 26-27 school year. I am a little bit overwhelmed at times when I'm looking through these budgets, because it's something, when you're on the outside of the budget piece looking in, you don't see everything that goes into it and all those processes. So this has been a great learning experience, but also just developing that understanding for the district as a whole, to be able to communicate that. There is a lot that goes into it that I think, like I said, we take for granted. And we had Brian here before, who had a lot of background in it from being a superintendent side and then the business manager. So it's great to have somebody who had that type of information, but until you get to do it yourself, you really don't understand it. So I look forward to walking you through today. The one big piece that I do want to point out here as we get started is this is not just a one meeting and done. If you look up the screen, we've had several meetings across the board with our budget committee. Really, it started all the way back in August, because when we adopt our budget for the current year, we're really moving into that next year already. If you look, we met on the 21st of October with those rough numbers after the 1st October count. Then we moved into December, looking at where things were across our district, things that have changed, the pieces that were in place. Met again in January, and then in February, on February 17th, we're actually able to look at the data based on the second count. And as we know, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, that A and B count pretty much drives our funding. So it's really critical that we have those pieces in place. This not being a legislative year makes our decisions a little bit easier, because most of the information is up front to us, so we don't have to wait for the legislative action that takes place over the course of the legislature in Helena. We do have the town hall tonight. We have a meeting scheduled for March 7th still on the books. We'll have to have a conversation about that if we're feeling like we still need it after this meeting as well. And then, really, to finish us out, we don't meet again until August when we take all the pieces. We finish up with the TFS, Trustees Financials, for the school year, and then we move into that new budget season for 26 27. So, when we talk about school funding, just briefly on it, when we look back in the 1980s, there were some court cases and pieces that went through the legislature that really identified that we have to have equity and equality in our schools when it comes to funding. Not all of our districts were funded the same way. Some of them had lots of oil money, timber money, plus they had high levies and so forth that went with them. So what they did is they went around and they worked with the legislature to come up with a funding source for us that they felt was fair across the board. It didn't matter if you were a Class C school, a one-room school, a double A school. They wanted to put it into a perspective so it was balanced across the way. It was an average. When you talk about that average for a double A school looks a little bit different than it does for a one-room school with two kids in it as well. So it's a hard comparison to put in the pieces together on. What basically ended up happening was 80% of our school budget came out, and they said the state's going to figure out the 80%. The other 20%, you have to look for local pieces for you to get that funding. Those are those levies that we work on as we move throughout our years here with Great Falls Public Schools. And our community's been good to us. We don't always pass them. It's not perfect. But we do have a sizable amount of money that comes in from that side. The key is, though, no matter how much, even if your voters want to approve more, you can only get to 100%. And that 100% is based on the state's 100%. It's not our 100% of what we believe. It's what the state believes makes it equal or equitable across all of those different districts. However, now we actually can kind of go above the 100% that they're talking about because there is housing piece that goes along with it. If you are at 100% of your current local levy, you are able to ask for money in addition. It's interesting because last year was the first time that this was out there on the preliminary budget sheets and the final budget sheets. What happened with it was anybody that ran a levy and moved back up to 100%, they didn't realize it, but that housing allowance was included in the 100%. So districts have had to figure out what they were going to do with it. It's something we've been working on as business directors as we meet with MASPO, as we meet with OPI, as we meet with Montana school boards, and we've taken a look at. We've asked them, you have to separate that out really, because when you're talking about 100% and not knowing, I can use Lewistown as an example because that's the one that MASPO used. I think they had an additional $70,000 that was in their 100%. Well, if you take $70,000 and you try to spread it over I don't know how many employees they have, but like 800 because it has to go to all employees for that housing. That isn't a lot of money when they're working on it. It's very minimal for the amount of work that would have to go into it, and they didn't realize they were asking for it. So they're working through that process, and many other districts that are at that 100%, they're working through what they're going to utilize that actually for. We weren't at 100%. We didn't ask for a levy, so it's not a problem we have. We kind of dealt with this when we had a charter school that came in because we were one of the first in how that funding flushed out. Those districts that were at 100% and were able to recoup that housing allowance, they're the ones that are flushing out for everybody else this time. So even though it's not really exceeding the maximum, it's like a new 100% maximum because of that housing allowance. It's nice because OPI did go in and they did separate those two out. They have maximum budget with a vote, and then they also have an additional piece in there so you can subtract it out to figure out where you're at on your particular levies. And then, of course, student enrollment year to year. That's the number one thing that's going to drive your budget because that's the majority of the budget that is in there for the district is taken up by the A and B. With our A and B, we do know which direction it's been going. It's not a secret to anybody. It's continuing to go down. So we'll talk about that in a second. But this first chart, when you look at it, per A and B, that 80%, it's all driven off A B, and B. So when you're talking, if you lose one student, 10 students, 15 students, 20 students, or if you gain and you go the other direction, it has a fairly large impact. The state does allow us to claim a 3-year average, which we have been claiming a 3-year average for several years. And I'll talk about that 3-year average just a little bit here when we get to the A and B. But if you look, there isn't a lot left over when you're balancing it up with what we can make it up with. It's a pretty small percentage when you look at the basic entitlement, the quality educators, special education, and other state elements. Now, with quality educators, obviously, the last time with the STARS Act, that has increased substantially. It doubled. There are some other pieces of the STARS Act that will still continue to have an effect on us. The future ready payments that'll be starting in another year. We're still working through those different pieces. I shouldn't say we're working through. Lance is on a group that's working through what that may look like for Great Falls Public Schools, but it's not quite perfect. And we don't know what it's going to look like for 100% certainty. Special education, when we look at special education for this current year, what comes from the state, we're almost at a flat number from what we had last year. There really is no increase that goes along with it. That's not including the tuition that we can permissive levy that'll be going out as well. But we have to take those things into consideration because we have to keep all of those budgets in line as well. So really what it looks like is you have that 80% on the bottom. We know what we're going to get. That's the minimum amount we can run our district on, or what the state says is the minimum amount based on your A and B of where you're going to be. That 20% up on the top, in order to get to there, you have to have that local participation in those mill levies that goes along with it. So when we talk about budgets, and we're looking at where we're at for the 25-26 school year, you can see up here, and this is a slide that Brian always used to show us how to forecast forwards. Over the course of this school year, our number in the middle where it says additional state funding there has gone up substantially. I wouldn't say substantial, but it has gone up, probably to the point that it is another teacher that we're able to pay over the course of the school year. So if we look at this year's general fund budget, we're at $85,500,000 approximately. Knowing what our A and B is now, looking, projecting out with those preliminary budget sheets, we're able to say pretty clearly and pretty accurately, we're going to get $576,209. Now, when we think about $576,209, we know that the legislature approved a 3% inflationary increase. That doesn't always translate to 3% across the board, but if you look at 500,000, that is quite a bit smaller than 3%, just off the top of the head when you're looking at it. The reason for that is it has to do with our A and B. As your A and B goes down, you receive less funding. You still get the additional funds with the 3% attached to them, but as your A and B goes down, you're not receiving the multiplier as often because of the number of students that you have. So really for next year, we're going to be looking at a budget authority of about $86,135,991. So that being said, if we look at where we started this year and we look over the last few years, about 4 years of contractual obligations, inflation of pieces that we worked on for electricity, for gas, for repairs, all those things that roll into our cost as a district, we're really looking at needing to add about $3,459,678. I don't think that's an exact number, obviously, but we know we're going to be in that ballpark come the end of the school or the end of the fiscal year next year is what we're going to have to come up with. That means in order to make the budget, we're just under $90 million, $89 million. So if you take those two and you subtract them apart, we're still looking for $2,883,469 to make up that deficit. So as we've worked through this, we truly started working on this last year in the consensus agreement pieces that Jackie had us participate in. We've looked, we've talked, we've looked for efficiencies, we've looked for places where we could save some of those funds. We have to come up with a way to balance that up. there's a couple different options that you can go. We could run a levy, obviously. And when we look at a levy and we look at where we're sitting based on our A and B and what we can be, our elementary really is about $800,000 by the time you take out that housing allowance. So you take $800,000 out of there, you're at $2 million of deficit. The high school is about $1.2 million. When you take the $1.2 million out of there, you're still substantially far away from where we'd be without a deficit. It takes substantially more to get there. So, one task that this committee has given, the board committee has given to the cabinet, is to go back and have some conversations about how can we get to this? Because there's no one way that we can make this budget actually flush out to a zero budget and match up magically by the money that's coming in from the state. So what we've done is we've went back and we've looked at what came in the past. What have we done the last couple of years to help us be successful in balancing the budgets that we have? Well, when we look at 24-25, that's the year that we did cut an executive director here with Great Falls Public Schools. And then in 25-26, there were a couple different pieces this year that we have looked at as we went through the elementary positions that we have not filled over the years. We have taken those 6 and really made sure that money was put into the budget someplace we can use it efficiently and effectively. We've taken away some of the divisional tournaments for our athletic events, which saves us in travel, overnight expenses as well. Our energy bond, or what's referred to a lot of times as the McKinstry, that happened in about 2008, I believe it was. We made our last bond payment. That totals about $450,000. So next year, we may be able to do some real allocation that we'll talk about here in a minute. We've talked about renegotiation of that electricity as well. And then we have to figure out where we're going to be for 26, 27. I feel like a slide is missing here because I should be on the A and B. Interesting. I'm going to give me 10 seconds here. I'm going to open it up off my other one because I do want to make sure we put out the A and B side. All right, where'd that A and B slide go to? No, it shouldn't be.
Is this the one you redacted?
No, this is not the one I redacted. Those were 2 blank slides where we cut some stuff in. I'm going to jump this slide up there just really quick, just so I can talk it through because these are the same. It's the same slide. But if you look with our A and B, when we're talking about what we're looking at for a deficit, this is how that deficit adds up. When you look at the elementary side, in 2000 fiscal year 24, we had 5,566 elementary students. That 206 that's up there represents our students that were at the charter school for the first year. In FY25, we're at 5249, and FY26, right now, we're at 5148. So if you do some math there, we're down about 418 students at the elementary level. If you look at the middle school, same thing, we're down about 16, and then at the high school, we're down 174. Now, the question I asked my administrators today when we were in there is, let's say in FY26, we stayed exactly at the enrollment of FY25. what would you predict the extra funds were or would be coming into our district this year? Committee members, do you have any guesses? Bill? It seems like it should zero out and we're going to be just fine straight across. The problem is we're working with a 3-year average. And when you work with a 3-year average, even if that number stays the same, the 3-year average does what? It goes down. Because that first year, 55, 66, we have no years above that after. So if we keep it exactly the same, we would add about $380,000 to what we're talking about tonight. It isn't like it would be a savior that would balance our budget. If for 3 years our numbers stay exactly the same, would we be better off or worse off than we are today? Worse off, because we're figuring everything off of 5148 for the elementary. We're figuring everything off of 1551. When you take a 3-year average of 5148 three times, that's 5148. You take a 3-year average off of 5566, 5249, and 5148, that's substantially higher. So really, for things to change in our budget, we have to have considerable growth for 3 years before you're going to see a gain that comes in it. You're going to have it break even, maybe, and it might be staying the same, but you're never going to get back to that 5566 number mathematically until you get something that is higher than that number to start bringing that average back up. This really is important in my mind because when we talk about funding, it's pretty well driven by our A and B. So for us to get to a point where it's going to start ticking up, it is going to take more kids in the buildings. Next year, like I said, if we continue to stay right at 5148, we're dropping 5566. So think of that average of 5249 and 5148, 5148. It's already lower to get started. So it's something we have to keep in mind as we're doing our fiscal planning each year of how difficult it is to get back to the place that we once were. Flip back over now. So that gives you kind of an idea of what that's going to look like. If we ever get to the point where we can flat rate across, then we get that full 3% that legislature has approved. If we never get to the point where it's the same all 3 years or it ticks up, you're never getting the full 3%. There's already the pieces within the formula that cause us not to get a full 3% because only certain parts of the formula get the 3%. So it's something to just keep in mind. So what we've done since then is we've sat down with what the committee told us. They said, go back, talk about what you can do from a district standpoint. The board has been very clear. I think as Heather and Tom before her, Brian before me, Lance, working through with our COVID dollars, we've been extremely intentional about putting money aside because we knew there was going to be a point in time that we needed those funds to help balance our budget. We're probably at that time. We know that by looking at where we've been spending the last few years. And the other side of it is it's really hard not to we have to give credit to the people that work with us as well, our staff. There's things that we have to do for them, and in order to do things, those costs are going to go up. Our funding, unfortunately, is going the opposite way, so we have to find other ways that we can hope to balance. So when we look at this, the levy potential, you can see up there, it's a little bit inflated on that elementary on that one because of the cost of living that they've had to take out of it. The high school is there as well. That went up a little bit with the preliminary budget sheets. We know those two numbers are not going to make it up. So as the committee tasked us, Jackie, Lance, Heather, myself, we've talked to those administrators out there. We've worked, and what can we do to help with this process of budgeting for our district? And first thing we looked at are the ones that are the obvious, those reallocations. Like I mentioned before, this was the last year of the energy levy. This is the year that we renegotiated electricity. So between the two, you're looking at about $570,000 worth of savings. That's a chunk. That's not all of it, though. So we continue to move forwards. We went through with their administrators, Jackie, Lance, Heather, have been putting together big sheets of all the positions out there in every single building, working through that with them to know which positions are filled, which positions we're still trying to fill, which positions haven't been filled for a while. Jackie and Lance have worked very closely with their administration with scheduling, because when they look at courses at the middle school or at the high school specifically, and you have very small numbers in there, we have to think about the efficiency of that classroom as well. We don't want to look at anything that would be eliminating any type of a program, but how can we make it more efficient within the building with the teachers that we currently have? When we talk about teachers, and I don't think it's a surprise to anybody in here, and I just heard Superintendent Micah Hill talking about this last night on the news, no one's coming out of college. It doesn't matter which city you're in Montana. There's just not the numbers, especially in the areas of special education. There's just no one coming out. So no matter what you do there, it's hard to make up just the positions that are open with what's out there for us to find or seek through recruitment as well. But when they went through their audit, they worked with the high schools. They found about 7.5 positions that they're able to kind of take and tweak. Maybe they're still doing 3 classes of what they normally were and then 3 classes of something else. Try to be more efficient with the numbers of students that are in the classroom and making sure that students still have those opportunities out there for them to experience throughout their high school career. Sometimes that has to do with maybe making some connections between Great Falls High and CMR in Paris. Other times it's more options that they can do directly right in their buildings. Middle school, they could come up with about 2 positions they could do a little bit of combining with. And then elementary, we worked hard on that one. We did identify, though, 3 classrooms that we feel we could move to more of a targeted classroom for class size reduction on there as well. When you put those all together, those add up to another sum. But lo and behold, it's not going to be that $2.8 million that we're still looking at for a shortfall. And trying to be careful with anything that happens in there with programming as well. Impact aid, we do spend 100% of our impact aid that comes in for special education allotment every year. That goes out to special education teachers, paras across the whole city. When you talk about the other side of this, the impact aid that comes in, it's a little bit more difficult to spend because it has to be directly tied to the military school and the military student. When you're below that 45%, it's hard to make that cut for us to start shifting the money over there, because that puts us kind of out of sync with what the government says we have to be. There are some pieces that we can utilize. We know there's a couple structural pieces over at Loy from the earthquake that we have to look at. Possibly we could look at an impact aid. But really, when we talk about the schools that we have, Loy is really the only school that hits that threshold of that 43 to 45%. So this will be the first time in the history of Great Falls we thoroughly take and move salaries into impact aid. When you talk about that, we're looking at reallocating about 8 of those from the general fund side over. That's about $485,000 by the time you have the benefits. And that's really an entry level teacher with our salary schedule at this point in time. When you take $485,000 out of that side of the impact aid, that means you're not really building anything up. From here on out, we're going to start to see that start to probably go the other way, because that's a sizable chunk of money. And depending on how our numbers come in for impact aid, what the government does with impact aid, that drives the amount of money that goes in there. Some years we get a little bit more, some years we get a little bit less. It's all dependent on what we have in our buildings. Lance, did I miss anything with the impact aid side? So even with those, we're still short. This, I'd love to say, is going to take $1 to balance our budget. It's really going to take us a little over $1 million to still take out of interlocal. Interlocal, that money was intentionally put there from their COVID funds to make sure that it was available for our future needs. We watch some of the other AA's work with this up to 2 years ago where they kind of were in that same boat and trying to find a spot where they were going to take the money out. When you're taking about $1.1 million out of something like that, and you think of yourself, I kind of put it into terms, I'd like to retire someday, but in order to retire, I know the amount that I have in my retirement account. I probably can't take more than about 4% out of there. If you do any more than 4, it's going to be gone a little bit too quick. Well, we're really looking at about 15 to 20% with that when you start to look at how that's going to add up. We've already been pulling out of interlocal for the last 2 years to some amount. And those of you that have been at some of the other board budget meetings, you've seen where instead of continuing to climb like it did through those COVID years, it started to already trickle down. We know that's going to be more, and then by next year, it's going to be a pretty significant drop off when we start to pull somewhere around $1 million right out of it. The other piece we told the committee was we are willing to go through and we're going to audit all the salary schedules as we go through. We got to look at those positions that have been filled over time, which positions haven't been filled over time, why they haven't been able to be filled as well, and try to figure out what we can do for those efficiencies that are out there. If they haven't been filled for 3 years, we got to figure out why haven't they been filled, and is it something that we need if we're able to operate in the way that we are. We really don't want to look at doing anything where we're cutting people. We like to do things through the attrition process. And really, this plan, we've explained to you, that's how this plan would work. Not looking at trying to get rid of anybody from our staff. So, with that, Trustee Henning, I had to look at your name tag there so I didn't say it wrong. I'm going to turn it back over for you to have discussion, questions, and comments at this time.
Perfect, thank you. I think there is a portion for us. So I'd like to turn it over to you guys and ask whatever questions you guys have of us or Heather or Luke. Anything about the plan that's been laid out. Our real goal was, like Luke said, we don't want to cut programs, we don't want to cut teachers. We wanted to show that we were being good stewards of the public money that we have. And because of how fiscally responsible the district had been with the COVID dollars that came in, we were able to, as a committee, we decided to recommend to the board to not go out for a levy this year. And we wanted to make sure that we could do it without that we were using our funds wisely and showing that, we were exploring all avenues before we went to the public. So if you guys have any questions for us, this would be your guys' opportunity. Tom.
We don't even have to go that far because when it comes out on preliminary budget sheets, that's all marked within there. So let's say we have 5,300 elementary students come in next year and that raises us just a little bit higher than what that average would be. It's automatically going to mark elementary to be marked as use the current one. Yep. It is. Yep. And you can look at those right there on OPI's website. If you go under budget, there's two pieces. You got preliminary budget sheets, and then you have the budget sheets that are under budget. They just have an asterisk by them, and if I remember right, when you see an asterisk and things, you think towards the bottom, but I think the description's up at the top of how to interpret it.
One of the things to add to that is that Mr. Decons has been very, very diligent in tracking the charter school, because this is still a fairly new concept to the state and to the funding formula. Once again, he found where it had not been calculated right and went back and worked with the OPI, and they had just missed a calculation, and so able for us in year 2 to get that calculation bumped up, because it made us look like we were about 300 students short of what we were last year. And so he keeps a very, very close eye on that, as does Mrs. Mainwright.
And the other part that goes along with that charter school, if you remember, when I had to flop into that other one because the slide was missing, you notice there was a 206 next to that elementary that had 5566, I think, on it. I have a little bit of apprehension of that because I do know, and I remember when we were up here after the first year, we received 0 A and B for our charter school. So that 5566 feels inflated to me, like they added the 206 to what was currently there. So I'm working with OPI on that. And I think some other districts that have charter schools as well that were original charter schools, we're all looking at that together because that's a dramatic difference. And we know our enrollment didn't change as much as the A and B there. So we know there's something, but we have people like Paul Taylor and Nicole Thuot and those guys down there that are very thorough. And we'll work backwards through it to do what we can to do what's best for the district. Tom? That did not happen, my understanding, because there were so many charter schools that were open. It pretty much, they said, we can't go that route. They did continue with the other side of it with Jumpstart aspect that went along kind of side by side with it, where we do receive that extra funding for the A and B for Jumpstart, but no additional A and B for the charter. Correct. And that's, no, not to my knowledge. I wasn't in this seat, but my knowledge says no. Jackie, can you speak to that at all? And it was minimal.
It's also when we talk about future ready, which is the additional payment we will eventually receive was in the STAR bills. It used to be Montana Advanced Opportunities Act. That actually doesn't come into play then until not next fiscal year, but the year after, 27, 28. And so we're starting to lay that groundwork with our teachers and our principals. We had a great discussion. I shouldn't say we. The executive directors and the principals had a great discussion about it today, looking at CTE and AP and dual credit, putting pieces in place to build those classes and be sure that we have what we need to have for that funding a good year in advance. But that's something else that I know school districts are talking a lot about, but we need to think of that in the future, not being able to solve some of our budget for next year.
A lot of the pieces that we're talking about tonight, when we talk about STARS in particular, there's a lot of incentivized programs within it. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind, not only with that one, but I think it was 567, I think is the other one that has the interlocal agreement in there where you can receive half your quality educator payment if all school districts within the majority of their land within your current county play in the interlocal agreement. School Boards Association is getting some more information out. They were very instrumental behind this one. So they're getting some clarity out to us. May be an option, but you also have to realize we're not just working with one other school district in Cascade County like some of them are. We're working with several across the way. And if you're going to join into that interlocal, the amount that you're putting into the interlocal has to be the amount of your direct state aid. So it's not a small sum that you're just dropping in there off to the side. It's pretty sizable. So how you manage that, it's a whole nother piece. I think at Great Falls Public Schools, we're talking several salaries and different pieces that come out of there. If we had to manage that for all those other school districts out there, how do you manage that within the HR system so payroll can get it out? Is it going to be as simple as a reimbursement to the other districts? There's conversation that possibly they're going to allow each district to hold the money in their own interlocal. I don't know how that works because that really isn't an interlocal if you're holding it in your own. It's not combined. But we're getting a little bit of clarity coming through. I think school boards associations will have some more information coming soon on that one as well. But it's another one that's incentivized. The only way you're going to do it is to do something totally different or put yourself in a place that you don't know where you're going to end up at the end of it because it's new.
Thank you for your question, Tom. Yes.
Yeah, it looks a little bit different than the position though. It's the amount we spent on those positions. So when I go in and I look at every building is separated out. If it's, we'll say Great Falls High, there's an amount that we spent this year on clerical salaries. There's an amount we spent on teacher salaries, actually several different amounts because they're paid out of different areas in the general fund. And what we do is we look at what's actually spent on it. Yep. Correct. Yep.
You know, historically, our goal has always been to fill every single position we have open. Reality tells us we don't have the number of applicants or qualified bodies, even coming out of our colleges, to be able to fill the openings that we have, let alone the openings across the state. I mean, the teacher shortage is front and center in a lot of what we're talking about, but it's also a shortage of qualified people in our secretaries, in our support staff, in every single position, crossing guards, you name it. So really taking a look at what are positions we haven't filled over the years that we're still kind of hoping we could find someone for, and questioning, do we really need those positions if we haven't filled them for 3, 4, 5 years? You know, what's in the best interest of our kids and being able to meet the requirements of our budget. Gordon?
I think I want to add to that. It's a reality in the coming spring, but odds are it probably will not total what the deficit will be. So we have to be planning ahead as well because we can see what our predicted levy amounts are right now. It's not going to cover the total of our expenses. We know our expenses are going to continue to go up. We don't know what the legislature is going to do next year, but I know Trustee Bronson just came from a meeting with the Montana School Boards Association, and they were very clear there that it may be one of the first times that the legislature in Montana goes in with a deficit. And when that happens, that usually is not good for funding purposes. Mr. Bronson, do you want to expand on that at all?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And, you know, I can use Chairman Johnson's comments too to probably illustrate the importance of what we're talking about. As most of you know, the way that we budget today, the way that Mr. Decons has so wonderfully laid it out this evening, is based on a formula that the legislature adopted for all practical purposes 10 years ago, with some changes, particularly related to things like the quality educator payment. But next year, we will most likely be dealing with a different formula for funding public education. And the question is, even if we have a new formula that theoretically would put us as school districts in a better position with respect to funding the needs of our districts, we also have a state that is facing a potential deficit in the general fund next year, which means, as you know, if you're in the legislature, they have to decide, do we make that up? Do we live with it? Do we make cutbacks? And since the education system in this state is so heavily reliant upon general fund resources, that's going to pose some very interesting questions, not only for our district, but for districts across the state of Montana. So I urge everyone, as you're going forward this year, this is an election year. We have people running for the legislature. I think it is wise to put the question to anybody running for the legislature, regardless of your party. How do you feel about public education? What are you prepared to do if you are elected to ensure that we don't fall back from the successes that we've achieved, but that we maintain them and we build on those moving forward? And so, again, there's a lot of potential concerns on the horizon, but there's also a lot of great opportunities out there as well, given the successes that we've achieved. But again, to address, Mr. Decon's point as well as Chairman Johnson's, a lot of what happens in the coming years will depend upon what the legislature decides to do during the 2027 session.
Tom?
Tom.
Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you for your comments. Does anyone else have any questions or comments from the
Craig, did you have
community?
your hand up? No.
Go ahead. Thank you. Anybody else have anything before I open it to my fellow trustees up here? Okay. Kim, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I think thank you to Luke for making this public presentation today. It's just once again a reminder that our district has had to make tough decisions, as Mr. Covich noted. Really over the last 20 years, and we've been fortunate over the last 6 to have a safety net of funding in response to the COVID pandemic. And I think what we're all seeing here today is that um, the safety net has reached its limits. It's stretched as far as it can go, um, and we're in a position where next year um, we're going to need support from the legislature and from our community. Um, and on top of that, we are likely going to have to make cuts even then. Um, so we've hit that wall, and we just have to hope that the trust that we've built with the community over the last 20 years, um, will help them, come to the table and realize that we do need
public support, in all of our buckets, as we look to deliver the best possible education system that we can for students, and that we do as right as we can by our educators and our staff. So we appreciate everyone coming out and showing your support for public education, and know that this is the first step of many to come between now and a year from now, when we will need that public support.
I was just going to add a related comment because several of you have touched on it here this evening. The notion that, where are the people? There's not a lot of folks here. All of us are cheerleaders, to use Tom's words, for public education. I will tell you, 6 years of service here, 12 years on the city commission, 6 years on a planning board, and 2 years on another elected body. People show up typically when there's a crisis, or in their minds they perceive there's a crisis. And right now, the community, I don't think, perceives that there is. And part of the reason, I think, is due to the efforts of this district, the trustees, the administration, and those of our community who support us. We have done a lot of good things in the mind of the public. And when they see or hear about good things, compare it to a few years ago during COVID, when we're trying to wrestle with how do we keep our schools open when we have, a dangerous, disease process working through the community that sometimes made it impossible to keep a school open on a particular occasion. So again, people show up, particularly in this community, when something is perceived to be wrong. Right now, I don't think that they do. But that doesn't mean that there are underlying, tones of concern out there. The example I always use is I'm the major grocery shopper in the family. And I recall very vividly an incident in one of the Albertson stores here about 3 months ago. And I just happened to overhear a conversation that another individual in the store was having, probably with a family member. And it was all about how we can't afford what we need this week. We're going to have to put some things back. And this particular individual, one, was not dressed in tatters. They were dressed very modestly. For all we knew, this person lived in a very, expensive part of town. But, appearances can be very deceiving. And I just happened to glance at what was already in her grocery basket, and I will say I didn't see anything in there that was unusual, untoward, just something that somebody really didn't need. It was just the basics. And I think that vision can be played out in our community every single day. We see a lot of people that are struggling. And I always, I'm not a big watcher of the news. The talking heads do not really amuse me or tell me very much. But when I do hear snippets of news, I always hear, well, the Dow Jones is doing wonderfully today. And my response to that, the Dow Jones is doing well. What about Doug and Debbie Jones? What about the average person? And there is a groundswell of concern about everything that is affecting, and we're seeing it even this week. Have you purchased gasoline this week? It's jumped about 30 cents a gallon in the space of a day. And that should be a reminder to all of us that we are impacted sometimes by events occurring around the world that we have no control over here. But those events will have some control over the decisions that we have to make here. Bottom line, it's just not an easy thing to do. And I've talked to a few people already in the community who said, well, if we could have run a levy and gotten $2 million, wouldn't have that just, been wonderful, to have? And my response is that assumes that the voters would approve that $2 million increase. And there's a psychology involved in mill levies. People say, well, we need $2 million. They think that you're taking $2 million from them. They don't necessarily see it in terms of how much it might be. 6.92 mills for elementary, maybe $50 more depending upon the value of your house. If most of us reflected on that, we'd say, I can afford that. I can buy one less latte. By the way, I hate lattes, so it's never a concern for me. But that still could be a big thing for some people in this community. And so I understand that concern that's out there. This is why going back to, future years, what our school boards association, many of our education groups are telling the legislature is we have to find a way to fund a system that meets the needs of our young people, provides, more than adequate compensation to our educators and the other staff who are involved in education. And the only way that's going to come is if the state picks up a larger share based on its ability to raise resources in larger amounts and much easier than we are here in this community, asking local taxpayers to shoulder a larger share of the burden. And I'll conclude on this note. I mean, we will have to find that solution in the next year, because if we don't, Mr. Deacons pointed out in the slide, we didn't have just one, but we had two lawsuits between 1985 and the early 2000s related to how we funded public education. The first dealt with equity, the second dealt with quality. I guarantee you, if we don't find the solution, there will be another lawsuit, and the people who bring it will win. They will win. At which point, the Supreme Court of the state of Montana will look at the legislature, look at us, and say, we've got to find a way to fund this system in order to stay true to the language of our Constitution, helping our young people achieve their full academic potential, equality of opportunity, and making sure that we can run a system that provides for a quality education for our people. So that's a big challenge to all of us that lies ahead, but it's, I guess, that 800-pound gorilla in the room that we haven't alluded to, but we are going to have to face it in the coming year.
Thank you. First, I just want to start by thank you, my fellow trustees on the committee, as well as my fellow trustees on the board, the cabinet. You guys have done awesome. We gave you, as a committee, we gave you, pretty big task in trying to cover our over $2 million deficit in our budget next year through reallocations, looking at what we can do without having to go for a levy. And I just want to say thank you that you guys did a fantastic job. And I think that it shows true fiscal responsibility, that we really are trying to work with what we've got before we're going to the community, because like Trustee Bronson said, times are tough and we all notice it. And our goal is to provide students with a quality education, and not just a quality education, but opportunities, experiences, things that they can look back on and say, wow, I loved my time in school. This was great. And where parents can look at our district and say, this is a fantastic place for my kids to get an education. I have children in the district, so I'm definitely invested in my children having those same opportunities, and I don't want to see cuts happen. I want to be able to provide opportunities to our students and show that, we really are working towards giving our kids the best future, the best, groundwork for their future that we can. I appreciate everyone who came out tonight. Genuinely, I think it was a great conversation. I think there were great questions asked. This budget shortfall has been being predicted by Brian, who was in your spot previously, since I came on the board. This is my 4th year on the budget committee, and it's something that's been discussed every single year, that we are coming towards this shortfall. What are we going to do to ensure that our students' education is not greatly impacted, that we are still providing as many jobs to the community as we possibly can? We are just not hiring at the rates that we want to be, and that's also been, over my past 4 years on the board, that's been steady, and it's been increasing the number of positions we're not filling. And I don't know where that leaves us going forward, but I appreciate everybody who came to the table to work towards this goal, where we can use what we've got. And going forward, I think we do need to show the community that we are, as a district, not just a district, but the students' futures are an investment, that something worth investing in. And I, once again, appreciate everyone coming out tonight. And if there is no further action to come before the committee, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you.